So good morning for me, it's afternoon. I'm saying you hello from Rome, where at the moment it is 27 degrees. It's beautiful weather. So we are going to talk today about the sexual abuse of women religious by members of the clergy or men religious. So first, I wrote something about a definition that we are not going to explore in depth today, but we all have to change our definitions about sexual abuse, since as Professor Rankin has explained, sexual abuse, we are not only talking about sexual abuse of minors anymore, but also of vulnerable persons. In this definition that includes vulnerable persons, there are at least two elements that are very important, and it is you have to be able to give informed consent for not being abused, and secondly, the inequality of power between the victim and the abuser is crucial in determining abuse. So let's keep that in mind before we go further. And I will start with a few historical notes, because as far as we know, Sister Maura O'Donoghue, who was as a member of the Missionary Sisters of Medicine, was the first to alert the Vatican about the abuse of religious sisters. She has two documents that are published on the website of the National Catholic Reporter, who did that in 2001 because they were very much disappointed that there came no official reactions from the Vatican about sexual abuse of women religious. You can still find them there, and you can see that they were not meant to be published. In fact, they were personal memos and notes. So the first is a 9-page document, and it is written because of the AIDS pandemic. Sister was responsible for taking care of that and for reporting on that. And at a certain moment, she realized that many religious sisters came to her who have been infected by AIDS. So since we know that AIDS is transmitted also by sexual relationships, she started to ask where that came from. And then it became clear that it was because of sexual abuse by men, amongst whom also priests. So this is the first document. We are going to see a little bit more about that in a moment. And the second was a 4-page document from a year later. That is her memo after she has visited the Vatican and has been speaking to Cardinal, the prefect of the Congregation for Religious Life, Cardinal Martinez. So the documents were written based on her visits to many countries, and that's important to realize: Africa, Asia, the Americans, and it was in her role as aid coordinator for the Catholic Funds for Overseas Development. She finally had a list of 23 countries where women religious were HIV infected by sexual abuse by men, amongst whom priests are to be counted. You will see, it is, I'll leave it a moment for you to read. It is South America, it's Africa, it's the Philippines, it's Europe. So it's everywhere. The second is from 3 years later, is from Sister Marie MacDonald. She's a missionary sister of Our Lady of Africa, and she submitted a 4-page report to the International Union of Superior Generals at the Vatican Office that oversees religious life, with the following title: The Problem of Sexual Abuse of African Religious in Africa and in Rome, and it treated the same subject. So some ask, why are you focusing, or is everyone focusing on Africa? Of course, it's because there is a problem there, but it's also, I think, a consequence of the history because it was the problem of sexual abuse of African religious in Africa and in Rome. So I think that played a role in focusing on Africa. And then in 2000, we had Sister Esther Feynman, Benedictine, who spoke to 250 Benedictine abbots in the United States and Mexico about the same problem. And as I said, since the magisterium did not react, the National Catholic Reporter publishes on 16th of March 2001 an online article, a report that was written by John Allen and Pamela Schaefer. So because of this publication, there came a reaction from the Vatican. It was Joaquin Navarro Valls, the director of the press office of the Holy See, who said, yes, the problem is known, but it is limited to a geographical restricted area. Well, we have already seen that that is contradicted by the list of Sister O'Donoghue, who listed 23 countries. And we will see in a moment that it is also contradicted by the research of Chitnall, Wolf, and Ducrot in 1998, and the research of Missio Aken, research that is very recent from 2020. So the recent reactions then of the magisterium, it is from Pope Francis, who answered a question on the plane where they were making a tour, a historical tour in the Middle East. And he answered a question from Nicole Winfield from Associated Press, who asked about the sexual abuse of women religious. And he said, he recognized the sexual abuse of nuns by priests and bishops, and including a case in which some clergy used women as sex slaves, he said. And he said he was committed to ending this problem in the Roman Catholic Church, and that the Vatican had already taken steps in that direction. A second thing, what we have seen with Professor Rankin, was the publication of Vocesis Lux Mundi in 2019 that adds the category of vulnerable persons to the group of possible victims of sexual abuse. Well, a very important question that we are going to discuss is whether religious women could be seen as vulnerable adults. And if so, if there are always vulnerable adults or only in certain cases. Also, the women religious have reacted on that, and the first were the American leaders, the Conference of Women Religious Leaders in the United States, and they reacted on a report of the Associated Press already in 2018. And they urge to report the abuse to civic and church authorities and to seek appropriate assistance. That was followed by a declaration against any kind of abuse by the International Union of Superior Generals in 2018 also, and they asked the same thing, to report it to church and civic authorities, and they say that they will help the persons who report the abuse. All those reports and answers can be found on the internet. That was followed in the 1st February 2019 by a whole magazine of the Vatican Women's Magazine, Women, Church and World. By at that point was the responsible was Lucetta Scarafia, and it condemned sexual abuse of nuns by priests. You see the date, 2018 and 2019, 1st of February, the Pope has reacted 4 days later on the plane. So after that, there was another statement from the United States that about the sexual abuse of sisters by clergy, and it was followed a few days later by sexual abuse by Catholic sisters, other sisters, so of sexual abuse of nuns by other religious sisters. So let's now see a bit more in detail what was in those reports and what can we learn from it. So let's have a look at the causes as indicated by Sister O'Donoghue and Sister MacDonald. A first important cause they see is that in the midst of the AIDS crisis, the sisters are seen as safe targets. And for priests, but also for other men, such as teachers and professors. So there was, for instance, in Africa, a huge epidemic of AIDS, and some priests literally said, if we go to prostitutes, we risk to be contaminated. Because of the vow of chastity of the sisters, we can be sure that they are not contaminated. So they address them to the sisters, and many have been raped or abused because of that. Secondly, because the fact that celibacy is not respected in those countries, it gets a different meaning as being not being married. So they said celibacy, we will see that this is a cognitive distortion, but it was used towards the sisters to convince them to have sexual relationship, because they said celibacy, doesn't mean that you cannot have sex. No, even you could have children, but you cannot get married. So because at that point and at that time, many sisters had not as high a theological education as priests, it could be very difficult for them to contradict them. Then the fact that women are considered inferior to men and that women have learned to obey men, as they say literally themselves in some of the researches, it is difficult to say no to a man, especially if he's older and a priest, which is at the same time a cultural and a theological argument. Further, the recruitment of the candidates in certain countries, and in certain countries this has stopped, but candidates needed a certificate or a recommendation from priests to be accepted as novices in a congregation. And because of that, sometimes they had to pay that with a sexual relationship. Some later, some congregations didn't trust those certificates anymore, because it had become clear that some nuns were already pregnant when they came into the congregation or the convent. Sisters who are studying in another country, because we have seen that the report of Sister MacDonald also says in Africa or in Rome, and when they are studying in another country, sometimes they do not speak the language and they do not have much of support, and they go, I have seen that in Rome. I don't say there were sexual relationships, I don't know that, but I have seen how they turn themselves to priests to help them to find their way, to get the necessary soggiorno and the right to stay in Italy, but also they get support from priests for how to write an essay or an article or their doctorate and so on. And because this relationship becomes very close, it becomes dangerous in certain cases. Even if the sister would like to refuse, she would lose all the support she has in a country that is not hers and of which she doesn't speak the language in the beginning. So sisters are often financially dependent on those who abuse them. So there we see one of the arguments of power, that if they do not accept the sexual relationship, the priest threatens them to stop paying for them, so supporting them. The silence, so the two sisters, MacDonald and O'Donoghue, said the fact that they don't dare to speak isn't helpful to stop the sexual abuse. And finally, it is the vulnerability of diocesan congregations, because if you are part of an international congregation, you can go higher up. If you are a diocesan congregation, you have to go to the bishop, and the bishop who is paying for this diocesan congregation. And we have seen and heard that in certain cases, the answer of the superior of a diocesan congregation was that they had to carry their cross, and that they had to do this sacrifice for the congregation, that otherwise the congregation would lose all financial and other support in the diocese. So, but there are in our time also already research on the topic, not much, because you will see also that it is very difficult to do research, and even the sisters themselves say it. And I also tried it, and it's very difficult to get support to do this kind of research. But let's see what is already there. I hope this is the first thing, because it's moved without my order. Yes, it's correct. So the first research is by Chibnall, Wolf, and Ducrot, and it was in the United States in the 1998. You do remember that I said that it's not correct to say it is limited to a certain place, because we will see together the results of their investigation that was based on 1,164 surveys. So a number of people didn't reply, but 1,164 did. So how many sisters do have a childhood sexual trauma when they come in? Well, 18.6%. And 6% of them have been abused by clergymen, and 3.2% by other religious sisters. But they weren't other sisters, but by nuns at that point. So this number of 18.6 is not different from the general number of women being abused before the age of 18, which is, like the World Health Organization says, 20%. So the idea that is quite widespread, that women choose for a congregation or for a vocation as a religious sister because they have been abused and because they do not want relations with other men or with men is wrong, because the number of, and at least for this research, the number of those who have been abused as children is not higher amongst religious sisters as it is amongst the general population. So sexual exploitation then, that is a violation of role expectation and an abuse of power and authority. And there we see that during religious life, 12.5% sisters are abused. Amongst them, those who are abused by priests. What kind of priest? Well, half of the cases, but the other half by other people. Half of the cases so are by priests, and they are spiritual directors, retreat directors, counselors, and mentors. And regarding other nuns, what is their position? They are also mentors, they are formation directors, religious superiors, or teachers. So sexual harassment at work then is rather low if we compare that to the general population, because religious sisters mostly work within their own environment and not too close to men, so that the chance that they get abused is lower than the general population, but still it's 9.3%. So it's an extortion of sexual favors, and if they don't do it, they will lose their position they have. And then how many are harassed within the religious community? 11.1%. Other forms of sexual abuse, 13. Rape, for instance. So if we look at the lifetime prevalence, so how many percent of the sisters are abused during their whole life, taking everything together, it's 40%, which is really very high. So the prevalence during their religious life, 30%, and all types included. The most frequent is that they are abused by the laity, 46.7%, and followed by religious sisters, almost 30%, and members of the clergy, 21%. But we are going to take away now the child sexual abuse. So what are the numbers then? Well, those who are abused, 45% is abused by other nuns and 30% by members of the clergy, 22% by lay persons, and for 2%, we don't know. So if we look at how we can start to systemize, because there is not much research, we will see all the research that exists. So if we can see that within 45 minutes, it means there is not much research. So my comments also on it. So the sisters were safe targets. Yes, but I don't believe that is the real cause. I think that the AIDS epidemic brings to light something that already existed. And that I can prove of my argument is that it is still going on and there is no AIDS anymore. So I think that the AIDS epidemic has brought to light a systemic issue that already existed. Power structures are important and they are gender related. They are the dependence on priests, because that's our topic of today. They have less education than the priest, and the priest has the spiritual and sacramental authority. There are in those research that we already have seen, we see also that there are structural issues like the recommendations that they need to get access to religious life and the vulnerability of diocesan congregations. So there is a new research that is smaller. 101 completed the survey by Missio Aken, and they speak of challenges. And so look at the numbers. The first number that's there, it's how many said that that was an important challenge. I think it's a challenge to be abused, but also a challenge because one does not dare to disclose. So the first number is the total number. Then you get Africa, and then you get Asia. So the clerical power and clericalism, 27, and you see that Asia thinks that this is higher than the ones in Africa. Fear and shame is very high again in Asia. The cultural norms and religious subordination, there you see that Africa has the highest number, and the taboo of sexuality and abuse, I forgot to write the numbers there, but it's very high in Africa and quite low in Asia. And the lack of information, 15, stigmatization and discrimination of religious women, 14, and it's more in Asia than in Africa. The cover-up as reason is more or less the same in the two. So I was thinking about the dynamics of that abuse, and I thought, oh, it would be interesting to compare it to what exists in child sexual abuse. So what the sister said literally is that they not felt hurt. So we hear the same in child sexual abuse, but it has a different meaning. There it is meant that a child is not credible. They don't believe it. In many cases of the women sexual abuse, it is women religious sexual abuse. They mean by we are not hurt is very often it's not acted upon. It's no answer, no punishment, no changes. In both cases, we have grooming process, and we have it for children for the child and the family, but for women religious, it is also her community. That's very important to realize, because the one who wants to abuse wants to have a good relationship with the superior of the community and the other sisters, so that they do not suspect the abuse and that they have a positive attitude to the perpetrator. In both cases, they try to isolate the victim. In child sexual abuse is for getting access, and they do the same with the sister, because they give her important nominations, they give her presents, and that creates jealousy within the congregation, which isolates the sister. And when the sister is isolated, abuse is very easy. So the stigmatization in both cases. In child sexual abuse, children are held responsible. And we all know the thing that if a man abuses someone, what do they say when it is a sister? It's the woman who has seduced the man. It's very difficult to get the opposite accepted. Oh, here is my. So then the cognitive distortions both use that. The priests in child sexual abuse, God put you on my way, they say to the children. With women religious, they discuss, for instance, the meaning of celibacy, or they say that Jesus had a sexual relationship with Mary Magdalene, and this kinds of wrong theology, in fact, trying to convince the sister. The image of the priest, of course, plays a role, and we see that in child sexual abuse, the priest is put on a pedestal, he's a saint, and he represents Christ on earth. And for women religious, in Missio found several times that they said that the priest is infallible. The silence in child sexual abuse by threatening, by manipulation of the abuser. In religious, for women religious, it's the taboo. You should not talk about it, or it is the shame. And then the transfer, we see that for child sexual abuse, we know that priest got transferred to another diocese to give him another chance. And we see quite the same with the sexual abuse of women religious. So the motu proprio, as I said, the vulnerable persons are added, and what the Pope says, that the definition of by the Pope of vulnerable persons, it is, you see, the most important point is that, in fact, he said, even occasionally limits their ability to understand or to want to otherwise resist the offense. So it means that if the sister cannot give a valid consent, it is abuse. And of course, that makes it difficult, as I said just before, because it's about two adults, and it's difficult to convince people that people can be taken into a web so that refusing becomes almost impossible. So, but let's see the crucial question of consent. And I think there are three situations that we have to make a difference. And the first is priest can meet women religious on parties, on social occasions, when in fact his role as a priest is not important. And the power differential is in some cases, of course, you have to see the culture. But still, if you look across the world, the power differential can be very small. And in those cases, it is possible that a religious woman gives her informed consent. And that is the case when both had not made a real choice for religious life. By the sister, we know of cases in Africa, for instance, that the price that had to be paid to get married was too high, and that becoming a religious sister was a good opportunity or a good solution for that woman. And I know from even here at the Vatican that for a number of priests, it's really not that they do not have, some have not a real vocation. And then it becomes very difficult to respect the rule of celibacy. So here it is possible that there is mutual contact. Here also, secondly, women and priests might work together in a particular project, such as school or catechesis. And in as much as the priest does not have a hierarchical higher position, a sexual relationship between colleagues can be based. or mutual consent. However, we know from research, for instance, the research of Sister Mary Lembo that we will see in a moment, that it is not without problems, because the sister can really have a lot of guilt because of the breaking of her vows. And we also have to ask the question, and I already indicated the cultural situation, whether in some countries, the question is it possible that women, religious and priests are really on the same level, so that there is enough freedom to have a valid consent? Because in some countries, priests are so highly respected that equal relationships are really difficult, and that in most cases it is abuse. I do remember from the research of Sister Lembo, because I was a director of her thesis, that she had one case in which the sister clearly said it was mutual consent. All the other cases were considered as abuse. And then the third situation, here it is always abuse. If the sister finds herself in a subordinate position and dependent of a priest, for instance, in pastoral or spiritual accompaniment, or if she works under his authority in the parish, then the power difference is such that mutual consent is not valid. Even if the sister says yes, her freedom is not big enough to give a valid consent, because in those situations, it's the one who holds the power who is responsible, always. If we replace here the priest by a therapist or something, everyone will immediately say, oh yes, that's true. But the priest and therapist in those situations, spiritual accompaniment or working, having another kind of pastoral care for the sister, he is in charge, he has the power. And even imagine that a sister is seducing him, the responsibility lies with him. Because we know by transference and countertransference that it often happens if someone accompanies you, that there is a phase in which the one who is accompanied falls in love with the one who is accompanying her. But the responsibility lies with the one who is in power. So I mentioned already twice the research of Sister Lembo, and let's go there for one part of it, because I would like to talk a moment about the consequences for the sisters based on her research. So the first consequence is it's on the physical integrity. A number of sisters become pregnant, and there are two possibilities. Or she is sent away from the congregation, or the priest, sometimes even the superior, asks for an abortion, which is really very bad, because what is happening again is that the sister is re-victimized, even being sent away. And what we see in reality is that a priest remains a priest, often in another diocese, or even not, just another parish, but she carries all the consequences. I had a long discussion with Sister Mary. She said, yeah, but they cannot stay in the, if they have a child, they cannot stay in the convent. And I would ask all religious to consider that again, and see whether that is, it happens now automatically, but maybe it should be reflected upon whether that is justice. So they are often being hit and threatened if, for instance, they had a sexual relationship and after a certain time they want to stop it, it becomes really very difficult. And some priests, not all of them, become very violent. And they are also deprived of usual financial support, so that they cannot eat anymore at the moment. Of course, once they are really in the congregation, they might not need it, this support, but it has also consequences before she really enters. If we have a look at the psychological integrity, they really feel pain. And the pain, and I never will forget that, because it was an eye-opener for me, because I also had a sister, Rejoice Huduafia, Ghana, who worked on incest in Ghana. And she said, you know what I see, because it's so difficult in Africa to talk about sexuality. What I see is that it much more manifests itself, the problems, in physical pain than in psychological pain, because they cannot talk about it. They have pain everywhere physically, and they have less all the psychological pathologies that we see in the West. I found it's a very interesting point of view, and it would need some more investigation whether that's correct or not. But she was quite after her research, she was quite convinced of that. Of course, they feel the weight of their unexpressed anger, because, you know, in Catholicism, normally you cannot be angry. And so they do not dare to express, also because they break the silence if they do that. And the silence is a very important point. If you have to carry something by yourself, or you can share it with someone else, it doesn't go away, but it becomes easier because you are supported. And that is what I found the most, personally, the most important point in her doctorate thesis of Sister Lembo, was that she studied the consequences for the congregation itself, because it has many consequences. For instance, to start with, the sister feels incoherent in her own community. She doesn't find her place there anymore. And she is afraid of the judgment of the other sisters. And she fears, and this is a real fear, that novices or other sisters may be involved in sexual misconduct by the same priest. And we have cases in which the same priest abuses more than one sister within the same congregation. So this becomes really very unhealthy, and makes the life in the congregation very difficult and tense. And all this leads to quarrels, jealousy, suspicion, and re-victimization of the sister, because she is considered to be the guilty one in that. The social integrity is that the priest can become very jealous and monitors her relationship. With whom is she talking? No one else can approach her, especially no other man, because he wants her for himself. And finally, there is also a spiritual integrity, because they go to church, they believe in God in many places, but they lose the inner joy of the faith. Being faithful, it's a kind of joy, you know, and even preaching and mission, it's because your heart is full of joy, but they lose this joy that faith can give us. And they say that if they are at Mass, instead of being inhabited by the presence of Christ, it's all the time the image of the priest that is in their head. So contemporary and future actions. It's not that there is nothing happening right now. We know that, but not enough. That's what the sisters say themselves in this very recent research of Missio. And what I want to say is that we are not going to solve the problem if we only educate the sisters. It's important, and I know there are also concrete strategies like not going alone with a priest in a car, not getting after certain hours in his office alone, and so on and so on. But there are more systemic reasons, and we have to address them. And it's not going to work if we do not address them with the priests and with the whole cultural situation within the church. If I look what the sisters say themselves now, it is, what do they need? They say themselves. So they need moral support and spiritual counseling. That's mostly asked 38, and 15 in Africa, 21 in Asia. People have to listen. It's like I said, if you don't have to carry it by yourself, look, the two first points are that. They want support, they want to be listened to, and they want moral and spiritual counseling. They want also legal support and prosecution. And they want in the introduction of accountability and an independent commission for investigation. Yeah, we have the same with child sexual abuse. If the church alone is investigating their own priests, the church, I mean the authorities of the church, and then it doesn't get solved. I worked for 25 years in this field. I know that. So it's they want it independent, and I think it's correct. And some also definitely need financial support, and they also ask for psychological support and therapy. They want awareness that we talk about it also publicly, what I try to do today. And some want physical protection, and they want also creation of networks. So action and future action. So what things have to be done? The selection of priests. So because even here at the Vatican, with people I spoke on very high positions, they said that a number of priests in some countries do not have a real vocation. The theology of priesthood and the sacrament and the respect for the sacrament of confession, because many sisters says it was during confession and immediately after that they have been convinced or threatened or for abuse. The formation programs, but as I said, on both sides, and they have to be broad. The end of silence, because I find this the most important thing. We see sometimes it comes up and we can talk a bit about it, but then it goes down again. There's again the rule of silence because of taboo, of shame, and the fear of damaging the institution. But we know already from child sexual abuse that that doesn't work, that it might become a bigger scandal if not the right actions are taken. And also many say that they are pressured by the bishop not to talk about it. I'm not going into detail, but the difficulty Sister Mary had for sisters to make them talk was very big, although being an African herself, she knew how well spread it was in certain regions. So the healing of those abused, the possibility of a dialogue and opening a center, they say, they want a hotline, because then it's more independent and they are not, their superior is not going to say that they have to keep quiet. And we have to have procedures and policies. And then, of course, justice, accountability, investigation by clergy and lay persons, and the acceptation of anonymous reports.